Well, hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the Reforming Nerddom podcast. I am your host, Jordan Cecile, and I am joined by none other than the one, the only P. Nate, aka Pastor Nate, aka Nathaniel P. Wright, NP Wright, perhaps. Nate, how are you?
Perhaps. I'd certainly sell more books if it was MP Wright and a few people mistook me for the aged theologian.
And you would have been totally justified in doing that because
I thought about it. I didn't think about it.
It's whatever you got to do to sell some books, right? Get in people's hands. N.D. Wilson sounds kind of similar. I mean, N.T. Wright, I kind of think I know he's kind of a controversial guy, but I think I saw something recently that he was saying some pretty weird stuff. I don't know. Did you hear anything about N.T. Wright recently?
He's one of those guys who he's super profound, very intelligent, and in certain things he's fantastic, and in other things you just shouldn't listen to him.
Yeah.
Right. So like he did the whole like new perspective on Paul, where he was kind of speaking out against penal substitutionary atonement. And that was obviously really controversial. And he and John Piper did some debates and writing back and forth and stuff like that. But like his work on the resurrection is still, I think, some of the best scholarly work out there in terms of the resurrection. And he wrote a book called How Jesus Became King, I think it's called. And it's one of the best like post-millennial books in terms of understanding the cosmic significance of Christ earning the crown. So his premise is basically because he's the Son of God and Lord of creation, he has birthrights to rule the world, but then he also purchased like rights to rule the world. So he earns it not only by who he is, but by also what he's done. It's actually a really profound book. So
I think we need to do an episode sometime on the spine of Scripture. Because it's along those lines. I've read it before, but right now I'm in a Bible study with some guys at church, and we're going through it, and it's touching on a lot of those similar things of like what is the arc of the Bible and how so much of it we miss it, where it's like disinheriting the sons of God and Jesus being the God man who has rightful both earthly and heavenly authority, and he is the only unique one who could actually be king of both, and how it's taking it from Satan and taking it from these other demonic beings. Honestly, it's such a crazy story because that's not anything of what you were likely taught in your little dispensational Baptist church or whatever it is, and it's such a radically not like so different that it's a different story, but there's aspects to it that are so different that it almost does feel like a different story. Like ultimately it's not, but it's like there's things that are more significant than you would ever realize when you actually look at it.
we should do that episode. We should get Justin Wright on because I know he's leading the Bible study on that, and that he's finding that book really profound. But the idea that God disinherits the nations, right, adopts Israel as his one nation through which he wins back the rest of the nations at the cross, and then you think about he disinherits the disobedient celestial sons of God, right, begets his only son, sends him into the world to die, to actually replace the disobedient celestial sons of God with human sons of God, right? As Christ's sacrifice brings many sons to glory. It's actually like, yeah, Spine of Scripture does it in such a concise way as well, where he tells the story, and it's just very, very compelling. He pulls a bunch of threads together in that book that were sort of loose ideas in my head, and then he assembled them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's do that. Let's I don't know if Justin would be up for that. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if I know you've spoken to Non-Tenant before about the book, but I think talking about it, even in the context of in what this podcast is, and the fact that we're so into fictional fantasy stories, and the real biblical account actually seems to be what we would say is more fantastical than most people would typically think. And so it actually seems to be more like, yeah, like what we would think of as a fantasy story. That's actually more what the Bible is like than most people think of it. And it's which I think it would be fascinating if we could get him on it. And actually, because I'd be curious to like pick his brain about what he thinks of fantasy fiction. And I mean, there's stuff in the Bible. I mean, I'm sure many people who are listening to this have heard of Blurry Creatures, and I'm sure most of you have listened to Haunted Cosmos. And I think well, I think sometimes those guys veer off into some weird spots, but I think the conversations they're having are interesting because I do think there's something that we've lost about the Bible that
Yes.
these guys are at least onto something and are trying to
Yeah.
reclaim that not the world is not just stuff and physical and even, a small thing where what is it, Lilith, that word Lilith in
Yeah.
the Old Testament, and it's just like, oh, a songbird as the ESV translates it, and it's like
Or a night owl, screeching
it's like a
owl.
lady demon, right? It's this is not out all the same, but it's like you even see the bent and the bias and the how cloudy even like the modern translators are when they've abandoned that spiritual, fantastical aspect. Like even I'm pretty sure what was the word? It's like essentially a unicorn is described in like the King James. Like the word for unicorn is actually there. And then
Yeah.
you obviously have like Leviathan and all these, sea
Yeah.
monsters.
Pan, right? A pan,
Yeah. Right.
like a
And
like a
so
half goat creature. Yep.
yeah, and so you have all these things, and it's you and I have talked about that. It's like, what if the world is more Tolkien than we've been led to believe, and we're just living almost in this clouded trance, right? Of with all these things surrounding us, telling us that the world is just stuff. But then, so
We're
anyways,
we're all under the spell of the Queen of Underworld,
that's right. That's
right?
right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, seriously. So, I mean, this is not what we're talking about today, but I think I would love to have that conversation, even with like a non-tenant or whatever it needs to be, because I think it's a conversation worth having. And but yeah, that is for another day. Today, we are actually looking to talk to you, Nate. I'm going to be interviewing you in a way about your recent books that you have officially published and have sold and are going to be selling more of, and it is the Crossroads Kids. And yeah, pretty exciting. This is something that I know you've been working on for a while now. I don't know. I don't remember how long ago you started working on the project, but it was a thing that the three of us, you, me, and Ben, were kind of talking about, and then you just really kind of leaned into it and really ran with it. And so now we have the first two of this little trilogy that you're planning, and I'm reading it with my kids right now, and they're just loving it. It's been a really fun thing to read through, and I mean, spoilers, people. Ben's kids, Nate's kids, and my kids, all three of our kids are the characters in the book,
Yep.
and it's taking place at our church. But before I even go ahead and do that, Nate, why don't you I'll let you, the author,
Sure.
why don't you give in customary Pastor Nate fashion, the big idea? What is the big idea, and what's going on? What's this book series all about?
Well, I mean, the book itself, the stories in the book kind of started as most good stories start with just a dad making stuff up, and
Huh.
so I often just make up stories for my kids. Uh, when we're driving, when we have a long road trip, before bed, whenever, and my kids love it when I just make up stories. And so I started kind of telling these stories a little bit about adventures that they had with their friends, and then you Ben and I, we talked about this, like, we should probably practice what we preach in terms of trying to take back literature and all that kind of stuff. So you, me, and Ben sat down. We kind of had a thought on, what if we did something together? What if we started writing these stories? And we mapped out a little bit of just sort of the concept. And so the concept is very similar to our church, right? A church family moves into an old, abandoned, ancient church in the heart of a town, and as the parents are sort of getting the church ready for worship and for ministry, the kids find themselves, getting pulled into adventures, where really they're involving themselves in the spiritual warfare behind the scenes. So you ask kind of what's the big idea. The big idea here is to try to actually marry what we were just talking about, like re-enchant the world for our kids and show them that the world's not just stuff and that there really is spiritual war going on. And so the book tries to um mirror, especially when you get into the second and third books, it tries to mirror that there's ministry happening through the church, through the parents of the kids who only feature as sort of side characters. But the main stories of the books are about the kids who are sort of engaged in the spiritual warfare behind the scenes. And so in the first book, the bell tolls and only the kids can hear it. And almost Narnia like, they get pulled into another world where they have to fight temptation and all this kind of stuff. And so kind of the overarching story of the series is that the church is doing, ministry in this town where there's this dark oppression that kind of hangs over the town. It's always been sort of this cloud of sorrow, this, hard town, dark stuff going on. And it all kind of relates to this spiritual entity that's had power in the church that through the kids' adventures, they slowly begin to diminish the power of this sort of oppression that's going on. So that's sort of the big theme. But for any kid who's reading it, and it's kind of written for 9 to 12-year-olds. They're just seeing an adventure, kids getting sucked into this Narnia like world and having adventures and meeting characters and encountering monsters and all this kind of stuff. But it sort of relates it all to the spiritual things that are going on behind the scenes. So that's sort of the big idea of the book and I guess the purpose behind it. So what happened was we all kind of talked about it. I just started writing and it really just the first story just kind of poured out of me. I've never written a novel before. I've never written a story like this before. So I would just kind of stream of consciousness writing. And then you have to, of course, go back and make sure you're not leaving plot holes and all that kind of stuff. But that's sort of how I did the first book. And as I was reading it to my kids and they really enjoyed it, and I let you and Ben in on it a little bit and thought, there might be something to this. So then I started actually mapping out the rest of the story. And is this going to be, a trilogy? Is this going to be 4 or 5 books? And so I've kind of mapped out where I want the story to go. So I've completed 2 books. So the first book is called The Church at Oxford Street, which sort of introduces the character, the themes, the church, the people. And then the second book is called The Bell That Calls the Dead. And it's sort of a follow up. And so the main characters in the first book are your kids, my kids, and Ben's kids. I incorporate another church family, more friends of my kids, into the second book. And the third book, I've introduced a couple other characters just as side characters. But the point of all this is really like I actually want people in our church. I want parents, I want dads in our church to actually take the theme, take the characters, take the setting that I've created, and write their own kids into the story. Like this isn't ultimately. I'm not trying to make a new Harry Potter and make some popular kids book. This is really for the my kids, your kids, Ben's kids, and the kids at Crossroads. And I want parents to make their kids the vision I kind of had was, wouldn't it be wonderful if all the kids in our church kind of felt connected to the mission, and they recognize that when they show up for worship on Sundays and they sing the doxology alongside us and they sit under the teaching of God's word, that they're actually involved in the warfare that's going on, because worship is warfare. And so it's just kind of putting a story to that reality, and that's sort of the heart behind it.
How did your kids react when you started reading to them like this completed story? What was their reaction?
I mean, it was one thing when I was reading it as like a manuscript off my computer. It was a total different story when I had the physical copy and they see the cover and they see that this is
Mhm.
a real book. But they loved it for a lot of reasons. Like number one, all our kids feature in it, as you know. And there are times when, Quinn makes a mistake, and there's times when she acts really heroically, and there's times when Judah kind of makes mistakes and he acts heroically. There's times when Alice makes mistakes and then later on acts heroically. And so, I think what's cool about it is they're reading themselves in a story, and it almost gives them a vision of who they want to be, right? Like Judah
Mhm.
is courageous and bold and he has to learn how to not be so impulsive and act with wisdom. And some of the wisdom of the girls tempers the zeal of the boys. But there's also times when, there's almost like an Eden-like temptation near the beginning of the book when it's the girls who are deceived and the boys have to kind of help. And so there's lots of big themes that I think parents can talk through with their kids, but in terms of how my kids reacted, I mean, they just loved it. And this is the thing. Like every story we ever read, you and I are reading through the Hierarchy series by James Islington. And like, of course, I picture myself as Vis, right?
Hmm.
He's awesome. I want to be
Mhm.
Vis. I want to be Adolin, right, from the Stormlight Archives. I want to be Kaladin. So I think we all have a tendency to put ourselves in the shoes of the protagonist. So when the protagonist actually is you, there's something very cool and special about that. And I think all our kids are experiencing that right now, and they get giddy in a way that they don't when they're reading about Peter and Eustace
Yeah.
and Edmund. But when it's Judah and Claire and Quinn, it's a totally different thing, right?
Yeah. Our kids right now, they're chomping at the bit every night. Like, actually, we're sitting down in our little, like, library sitting room area that we've got set up, and, every night for the last 3 or 4 nights, I think we're a little over halfway through the book now, book 1, and everybody's just sitting down, quiet, like, they're laughing, they're just, like, asking for one more, they're always asking for one more chapter, so it's so fun seeing them, and then even yeah, because there's a couple times in the story where Alice makes, like, foolish decisions, and then she even said, "Why do I keep making bad decisions?" And it was just so it's and then because we haven't gotten to the point yet where she might
Yeah.
redeem herself in that, because there's a couple times, and so, I'm excited for her to get there, and as you were even saying that, about the kids seeing, uh, things that they would strive to be or who they would strive to be, and it's like, what a great tool to actually do that, even as a parent, where for a parent to, even if they sat down and wrote a short story about their kids, and even in that, without without directly saying it, you could even use it as a way to address some of the potential sin issues or struggles in a kid, and then how you can teach them to overcome it with the character in
Yeah.
the story. Because there are times in the book as we're reading it where it might be thinking about, like, there's you can tell that they're, like, reflecting on themselves, like, is that how I would actually
Right.
deal with this, or am I really brave, or am I really scared? But then in it, as the parent, knowing them and pointing them in the direction that we want them to go, we can use this little story to then show them, okay, this is how you overcome that, or this is how you be better than that, or whatever that lesson is. But, like, what a great way to actually teach your kids without having to actually say it, because they're going to be way more receptive to hearing it in a story than they would be to just, like, you sitting down and saying, "Hey, Judah, stop," or "Do this," or whatever, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I really wanted to do, and this comes out in the first book and in the second book, but in the first book there are a couple of bad decisions that are made by a couple different characters, and I wanted to like show and model like repentance and forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. And so there's moments that happens between the kids, and you're trying to keep the levity of these are children interacting, but also showing them how to make things right, and how to confront sins in one another, and how to have conversations, and how to forgive, and how to trust the forgiveness that you've been extended, and all that kind of stuff. So there's some big themes that I try to work through, and that's the whole goal is like I know for me my favorite part of reading to my kids, and I love reading stories to my kids, is put themselves in there, and what decisions would you have made, and how would you have done this differently, and I hope what I was able to accomplish was giving parents a really fun story they can read with their kids while still wrestling with big enough themes that they can have really meaningful conversations with their kids afterwards. That's the whole
Mhm.
goal, right? The
Yeah.
goal is this is a discipleship tool for the parents in our church to read to their kids, and then, have conversations that really matter with their kids. So that's kind of the goal that it's kind of freeing when you're a pastor and you're writing, and it's just like I'm thinking, how can this serve our church family? And I'm excited that there's a bunch of kids in our church who I hope they feel more a part of the church, because now they're not just, Claire and Alice and Lily aren't just friends, they don't just have friends at the church that they go to. It's like, no, there's a community that's being created through these stories that I hope they're all sharing, and they realize this is a part of it, and they're growing up and they feel an ownership over this church, because in these stories they're
Mm.
exploring every nook and cranny of this old building, and they're trying to get a glimpse for what it is that we're doing here. So the mission of the church they get to be involved in, right?
H Did you find it easier or more difficult writing with a set, like, I'm assuming having the setting of the church, oh, you I guess part of it is in the setting of the church, but then like the kids that you know, did you find it easier or more difficult to write knowing the kids as well as you do? And even like the setting, was it helpful to visualize our church building, or did you find
Yeah.
that like how'd you find that?
Yeah, I that was much easier. So in the second book, the majority of the scenes take place in the church building, and then there's a scene at your home, there's a scene at our home, there's a scene at Ben's home. And so I'm picturing, what does the and there's a scene at the Mellows home. I'm like, I'm picturing the Mellows backyard. They actually have a trampoline, right? I'm picturing, Ben's family devotions around his dinner table. I'm picturing his dining room setting, and so it helps me with the descriptions because I've never done this before. So it was helpful for me to have something to go off of where it's not all completely made up. Now, obviously, the scenes in the garden are made up, but I think even with that, I probably relied pretty heavily on things that I've already read, but it
Mhm.
was definitely helpful for me because I just used our church setting, I used our various homes, and that was really yeah, that was really helpful, I found. And yes, knowing the kids was good as well because I do think, like, I think I know all especially those kids because we vacationed with your family, we spend lots of time with the Emerys, so knowing the kids as well as I do, there's even little things that I put in. I don't know where you guys are in the story. There's little things that I put in that, like, only your family will get,
Mm.
and I'm excited for them to get those pieces and just be like, "Oh, like, this feels real. It feels like we're
Mm.
actually in this story because, o o only my dad calls me that." And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
things like that.
Are you anticipating any angry emails or bribery to get certain families or kids into the third book?
Well, it's funny because I posted on so this whole thing became a bit of a project. I wanted it for my kids and for your kids and stuff, but it kind of became a project because as any listeners from our church know, we have the Makers Market coming up, which is a time when people in our church who are talented at making pizza, as Jordan is, and talented at, making homemade soaps or, beef tallow skincare products or whatever else granola church like ours people are involved in. And kids always get tables at those markets and they sell little bracelets and knickknacks and all that kind of stuff. So Quinn really wanted these things so that she could sell them at the Makers Market because she was, this is a project that I kind of roped her in on, and she helped me with a bunch of stuff. She helped me. I mean, it was AI that did all the book cover, but her and I were giving the prompts and looking at things. I was asking her what she liked and everything. So she really feels a level of ownership over this project. So anyway, we're advertising what the various tables are at the market on social media with our church family. And so all of a sudden now it's kind of the secret's out that I've written these books. And I even have some of the kids I teach at our classical school, obviously. And some of the kids are like, "Hey, can I be in the next book? Can I, what do I have to do to be in this one?" And I'm already now thinking of spin-offs of like the adventures at King's Cross Academy and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I'm thinking of lots of different stuff. There's only so many, so much time of the day, but I really did enjoy the process, and I'd love to. I even say I have a sort of like note from the author that's going to be at the table at the Makers Market, and one of the things I say is like I wish I could have included all the kids at Crossroads, but even keeping the 9 children in the first story straight was not an easy
Yeah.
task. So
Yeah.
I just say like, but I hope that everybody can kind of see themselves in these stories, and then my hope is that other parents will actually take the setting, take the world, take the characters, and put their own kids in there and write them alongside their kids' best friends in the church. And hopefully there's, I'd love to see our library book shelf filled with stories written from our own people. That'd be a dream.
Yeah. And it's honestly, I mean, we had discussed like when this whole kind of idea, and you kind of came to Ben and I with the idea of the Crossroads Kids, and then we all started brainstorming what it could look like. And so I had an idea that I had started writing in that same world. And so um, I think it could be, it's like even my thing is set up as I'm thinking of it as a Crossroads Kids mystery. And so it's like you could have, and so like that's just like, but it's same place. It's the lure of what you're establishing, but then it can also be different, right? And I know Ben,
Yeah.
he was over last night for dinner, and he was telling me about the idea that he had, and he had started kind of working out an idea, and I was like, ah, that's actually really cool. It's different, but it's really cool. So it's like it can spawn so many different things. So it's I have found in reading it and seeing it's like, okay, like Nate can do it. I think I can do it. I mean, I might
Yeah.
not do it as well, but whatever. Like it's we're I think I can. And so it's like it's encouraged me and motivated me. So now every day for the last few days, I've been doing writing every day because I know
Awesome.
like for you. And so I guess like even for you, like what did that look like for you in the process? You're busy, you work at Ezra, you work at the church, you have this, you're a dad, Judah's busy with hockey. How did you fit this into your schedule to make sure that you actually kept moving the ball down the field?
For me, it was number one, getting Colleen on board with the project. So once I started writing it, and she understood the goal of trying to get at least one book, hopefully two books done by the Makers Market and published and everything. Um, Once she was with it, she was actually great because there'd be times when the kids go down, and we usually call 8 o'clock at our house wine o'clock, and we we kind of pour a glass of wine, and Colleen and I debrief the day, and then whether you go in the hot tub or you put on the Jays game or whatever, she would often be like, "Go grab your laptop." Like, so she would kinda spur me on, like, "Yeah, do a bit of writing." So, what I tried to do is I tried to set aside 2 nights out of the week where I would just write. And so I'd start at like 8 o'clock and I'd write until 10 o'clock. And so twice a week, undistracted 2 hours. But then because I enjoyed it so much, it would be like, yeah, the Jays game's on. It's not one of the nights that I've set aside for it, but I'll just pull my laptop up and I'll start tinkering. And the nice thing is once you get some content on the page, if you're feeling creative, write. If you're not feeling creative, edit. You know what I mean? And so I just found if I'm always doing something, if I just really didn't have the brain space, maybe it was a long day of sermon writing or whatever, I just didn't have the brain space to actually be creative in that way, then I'd pull up Midjourney and work on the artwork and stuff like that. Originally, I wanted actually there to be artwork throughout the book.
Mhm.
I don't think I can use Midjourney quite well enough yet to get it to do exactly what I want. I used it for the book cover designs, and I have some pictures that I could incorporate, but like only 3 or 4 pictures turned out the way I wanted them to. So, um, I that's something I'd like to do when these hit their final iteration. The first 2 books are done, but I think once I get some artwork and stuff, I'd like to actually print them and get somebody like you to help typeset and all that kind of stuff. Because all of this was just done through draft2digital.com, which is sort of a tool that authors can use to kind of take a manuscript and get it into a finished published product. Um but yeah, it was just the discipline of sitting down and doing it. Even when we were in Muskoka, our families, vacationing together, we had Peyton, our littlest, who was still napping at the time. So we're all at the beach all day, and I'd be like, you know what, Colleen, I'll take Peyton back to the room, let her nap, and for the hour and a half that she napped, I just pulled out the laptop and worked on it. So, and there'd be times when I get up early at 6 o'clock and get an hour of writing in before the kids got up and stuff. So for me, it was just a matter of working it into my daily routine, and once I had a rhythm of getting some stuff done, the project kind of just became consuming. It became something I was thinking about when I was driving and all that
Mm.
kind of stuff. I couldn't wait to get home and add the thing that I had thought about adding. So it really just became a matter of, chip away at it. And I think I learned this from Doug Wilson, right, in Plodcast. Yeah, I have to write conference talks, and I have to prepare for podcasts, and I have to write sermons, and I have to counsel, and I have to, like, there's lots of stuff I have to do. And, but it's just chip away at things, right? If you
Yeah.
think about sitting down and writing a book, it's daunting. But if you think about sitting down and mapping out a storyline for a book, that's not as daunting. So sit down and do that. And then it's like you're looking at the map that you've written out and you're like, "Oh, I really wanna write that scene. I really wanna write that scene." And then you just sit down and start writing it and you get piece it together. So just plot away at it, chip away.
You went a bit more off the cuff on book 1.
Yep.
You planned out and mapped out book 2.
Yep.
What is what's the process you're gonna use for book 3?
So book 3 is already all mapped out. I have
Okay.
about 5 chapters written out of 35.
Okay.
So I'm hoping my goal is to have book 3 done by the end of this year, and then obviously it needs to be edited. My sister helped me a bit with editing, Ben helped me a bit with editing. But that's sort of my goal. It's way easier to map things out. So,
Mhm.
book one was just, again, like I'd just sit down and write. Again, originally this was just a story for my kids. Once I thought about the idea of making it something bigger, then you have to think about plot holes and foreshadowing and all that kind of stuff, which is way easier with a map. So the first book was very much off the cuff, and I had to go back and fix some things and all that and fill it out, because you get to the end of it when you're just writing stream of consciousness, and I think it
Mhm.
was about 25,000 words at the time. And so I wanted it to be longer. I wanted it to be a more substantial book. So I went back and added some chapters and lengthened some scenes and everything to get it up to, I think it's about 40,000 words now.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, book one, that was just the process that worked for me. But definitely mapping out a story is way, way easier in terms of getting the writing done, because you don't have to write it linearly. You can write what you want to write at the time.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple times AI tools and how they
Mhm.
were helpful in getting the book done. And so one of the things that even just the last couple nights, so I in talking to you before this, knowing that you liked the mapping it out, I've been trying to like think about that and map out kind of the arc of the book that I'm writing right now. And one of the things that I found so helpful with the AI stuff is even just thinking about, because there's more of a formula to a lot of these types of books than people might realize, where
Yeah.
there's a certain point where you need to introduce the bad guy, you need to introduce the conflict, you then need to, a turning point in the story where they realize what has to get done, and then there's a conclusion. So it's more formulaic than people realize, but that's what makes good stories, and that's why most good stories follow a similar rhythm when it comes to their format and how things are outlaid. So it's really helpful for me as I was doing that and just like I put in the idea. It's like, okay, this is what I'm wanting to do. What are the things that I need to be mindful of? So if I'm aiming for a book of this many chapters, what does that look like? And then it actually just helped kind of uh outline what those moments are. Not like I'm coming up with what the moments are, but it's like, well, you need to have around this point in the story and around like the 10th chapter, you really need this to start happening in order for you to then lead that into a resolution that is satisfying for the kids. And so, did you do anything like that throughout? Were you using ChatGPT at all for your writing process?
Not in the first book, but in the second book I did, because I mapped it out. What I did was I mapped out the chapters, and then I plugged it into ChatGPT, and I just kind of said, like, does this arc? So what I did was I actually took the finished first manuscript and I plugged it into ChatGPT, and I said, I'm writing a follow up to this.
Hmm.
And then it's like, okay, that's great. Would you like ideas? I'm like, no, no, no. Here's my idea. Here's the outline for book two. And then I just said, like, does do all of the characters have and it made some suggestions. So, like, not all the kids are in the second book, partially because ChatGPT was just like, you need character arcs for all this, and I realized how complicated the whole thing was getting.
Yep.
So, yeah, I plugged it in a few times, and same sort of thing where it suggested, like, oh, this character, the payoff at the end, for this character will only make sense if there's this moment of conflict beforehand. So it definitely helped me map different things out. So
Hmm.
then even what I would do is, like, I Jack Mello is a big character in the second book, and he was introduced in the first book. And one of the things that ChatGPT very helpfully said was just like, he's not introduced in the first book. There's no emotional connection to him. So you gotta make make the reader know who he is. You need to spend more time developing who he is early on, because, like, especially for me, I'm writing about kids I know and families I know, right? So I know Jack, I love Jack, and I know all of his quirks, but I had that hadn't come through in the writing early on, to the point where ChatGPT was just like, yeah, nobody's going to care about this character. It says it differently, but essentially. So I actually found in the mapping out of the chapters that was really helpful for me.
Hmm. Yeah.
or
No,
or
it's
little things, like, it would even suggest, like, what if Pastor Nate has a conversation, what if one of the kids goes to Pastor Nate with a question at this time. And so even just the idea of inserting myself into the second story more so than I was in the first, and that being a guiding point for the kids, was a suggestion that ChatGPT came up with. So Yeah, I mean, I'm not a writer, so unashamedly, it's a great tool. Like I said, the artwork wouldn't have got done without Midjourney, and even I actually used for the art design, the picture was Midjourney, and then I brought it into ChatGPT to add the title
Mm,
because words are hard for Midjourney.
yeah.
So just little things like that, like this book really wouldn't have happened without those tools, I don't think, or it wouldn't have been as
Well,
good.
because what's really the difference? I know, like, we've championed AI in its proper place before, but, like, this just seems like such a great example of that. Because, like, those are all the things that if you go and you paid a legitimate editor. I know your sister helped you, and, I'm sure, like, I know Ben, provided feedback, but there's things there that you're not really gonna know to think about unless you are somebody who does this for a living and you just think in terms of that. Because even just some of the recommendations it made or it provided for me, where one of the things that makes a good story is kind of having clues of the of the resolution early on, so like foreshadowing it, so then the kids go back and like, and so even how it was just like saying that, and it's like, well, make sure to mention this early on in this like subtle way. And it's like, oh, that's brilliant. Like, I wouldn't have necessarily thought to do it that way. And like, how much money would you have had to spend with an editor, like a legitimate editor? And like, this book wouldn't have happened because, well, one, like, in terms of publishing, it's like you're not a known entity. So then finding somebody who would be willing to even take you on, you're having to pay an agent. They're then going to have to go and try to find a publishing deal because you're not known. The royalties are probably going to suck. So it's just like the fact that there you this is proof that you can actually get your book done in a way that, like, the finished product is excellent. Like, I think actually that, yes, I'm a bit of a into like a design snob. So it's like, because that's what I do with Ezra. But even for me, where I'm like thinking about borders and font spacing and font sizes and whether there's like,
Yep.
all the little interior
Fronts
technical
and
things,
orphans and
it's
all that.
actually really good. Like,
Yeah.
I'm actually really impressed with it. The fact that they did what they did and you didn't really have to pay them a ton. I guess you're just kind of paying them per book, right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so Draft to Digital kind of gives you the ISBN number and they do all the formatting and stuff for you, and you just make less per book that's sold because they put it on Amazon and they do all that stuff
Yeah.
for you. So everything that I'm selling at the Makers Market are all author copies. Now, the one thing about Draft to Digital that I didn't think about at the time was they're based in the US.
Mhm.
So obviously Canadian dollar is not great right now, and then also getting the books over the border, you end up having to pay some duty on them. So whereas, if I was just to buy them and pick them up, these are costing me like $2.80 or something like that per author copy. But that becomes $6, once you do the conversion, and then once you actually have them shipped to you, shipping adds a bunch, and
Yeah.
then duty fees on top of that, getting them over the border. So there's a few things I would maybe look there. I'm sure there's a draft to digital equivalent in Canada that anybody who's listening, I maybe suggest that afterwards. But ultimately, you're right. Like it just wouldn't have even Grammarly. So one of the things that was really distracting early on was some of the inconsistencies in the formatting of like, when the kids are saying something in the dialogue, it's like,
Mhm.
the quotation and then the comma and then said so and so, and what do you capitalize, what don't you capitalize, all that kind of stuff. Like it uniformed the grammar in the book in a way that, and again, that would have been me paying an editor to do that, but AI was able to do that fairly quickly. So yeah, it was also just the timing of things. Like I was able to basically write this book over the summer and I have 2 finished copies ready to go for the Makers Market in November, so
Yeah.
yeah, the timing is great.
What what would if you could give a piece of advice to somebody who is wanting who wants to do this? Let's say there's somebody in our church listening and they hear this idea of Crossroads Kids, and maybe they've got a good idea for a book. What would your recommendation, like, what would you say to them to motivate them or encourage them to do what you did?
I would say, number 1, just start writing, like, the biggest thing for me is I sort of fell in love with the process. I started looking forward to time when I would have to be able to just sit down and write, so just start writing, and then when you start actually writing bits and pieces, read it to your kids. Your
Hmm.
kids' excitement will be what motivates you to keep going. So like, it's almost like an accountability thing. Like I'm reading these to my kids, and they're like, "What chapter have you written?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm on chapter 15." And I've read to them, up to verse or chapter 12. And so I'm like, I got to keep going because eventually they're going to ask me and I'm going to run out of chapters here, right? So number one, just get writing. And then number two, start reading it to your kids, even in bits and pieces. Like they might only get it in bits and pieces, and the finished product will be different than what they finally get. But kids are pretty good gauges of like, are your kids interested in the story? And I've told my kids lots of stories, and some of them have landed and some of them haven't. And so when the kids get excited and they get engaged in the story and they want to know what happens next, that was a big motivator for to keep going. So yeah, definitely just start writing and then share what you're writing with other people to gauge excitement and intrigue, and that'll also help motivate you to keep going and getting it done. Because I think there's probably a whole lot of wonderful books that are half written, in the
Yeah.
minds or on the computers of authors that just never get finished because people procrastinate or things get, share it with some people so their excitement spurs you on to actually finish it.
And I think probably enough people just think like, well, I could never do that. I could never be a good writer. But it's just interesting how, I mean, I think you're evidence of somebody who reads a lot of books. I mean,
Mhm.
you're a storyteller every Sunday. So like in a sense, you tell stories every Sunday in your sermons. But I think like it came across like I think you did a great job for your first book. I don't think most people would
Thanks.
think it was the first time you wrote, but I was surprised even when a few months ago I sat down. I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a stab at this, and I just did what you said. Just started writing, and I then read it to Melissa and the kids, and they were just like, okay, like what's next? So very similar to what you said. They were just like, now what? Because I wrote, I don't know, it was maybe about a page and a half, and uh and I asked Melissa, I was like, well, like how was it? And she's like, well, you read a lot of books, so I hope you can write decently. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I think that was just even for like those who people listening who might feel the same way as I do. It's like, well, I'm probably not going to be very good, but I'm going to take a stab at it. It's like I think if you read a lot, you're probably going to have an advantage. Like you're going to do okay because you
Yeah.
read so much. You're used to seeing how words flow and sentence structure flows and character dialogue and how they describe the world and whatever. And now obviously like the books you read are going to have bearing on how you write.
Yeah.
Like even like my writing in the very little that I've done is different than your writing. And
Yeah.
I can see that immediately where you're a little bit more descriptive of the world, more similes, a little bit more metaphor, whereas I'm a little bit more just talking about the characters and using the characters. So it's just I think if those people who are concerned about starting, just like start
Yeah.
and
That's
like you're probably gonna do better than you might otherwise. But then even just I think your example of using AI is so good because just put it in there and just
mm,
say like what's good about this and what isn't. And I did that. That's one of the
yeah.
things I did. It's like, okay, here's a page and a half. This is the story I'm wanting to write. This is kind of the idea that I'm going with. P- Provide some feedback for this little chunk. It was like a page and a half. And it did. And it was actually incredibly helpful where it's just saying like, well, if, make being mindful of your audience, you might want to do this. You want to set the scene a little bit more, so maybe be a bit more descriptive or a little bit more magical or whatever. And it was incredibly helpful. So I think
Yeah, and that is one thing that I did that I forgot to mention was that I plugged when I plugged the first book in when it was at about, 25,000 words or whatever, and I knew I wanted to expand it. That's exactly what I said. What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of this story? And it gave some really good advice in terms of like, yeah, it mentioned a couple things that I think one of my metaphors was I talked about something and described an orchestra, and one of its feedback pieces was like, I don't think kids who are 9 and 10 necessarily know what an orchestra is,
mm,
or if they do, that metaphor might not land for them. Say something else. So it made me relook at some of the metaphors I was using and saying, is this age appropriate and all that kind of stuff. So it was actually really helpful with that. I can't remember exactly what the strengths and weaknesses were, but once it identified them, it's like, okay, then lean into your strengths and try to, fix the weaknesses. So it has access to so much information that it's like it's as good as anybody else who doesn't know your work. If you just got an editor and they said, what are the strengths and weaknesses? AI is going to tell you just as well as somebody else who doesn't know the world, doesn't know the kids, doesn't know you.
Yep.
It's going to be objective, and it's in what it's looking at. And I found that because I did find it was being ChatGPT was being fairly encouraging and flattering, and I was like, okay, will it just do this with anything? And so I just like wrote something else that I didn't think was very good and plugged that in, and it was just like, yeah, there's not this isn't very good, basically, is what it said. And I'm like, okay, so
Yeah.
it will actually tell you if something's not good.
Yeah.
And so it is a helpful tool that way, just to get you directionally going in the right direction.
Yeah. Real quick, do you have any plans? Are you already workshopping any ideas for what comes after you're done book 3 of this? Do you have any ideas for the next nonfiction
Not
or
for
fiction?
kids
Sorry.
books. So, like, I
No.
read the book, and I would recommend this book actually to anybody who wants to write, is, Doug Wilson's book, Wordsmithy. Had
Mhm.
lots of just really good practical advice, and so one of the things is obviously my role is with Ezra, Joe, and a few people have been encouraging me to write, theological books, and one of the things Doug Wilson says is, if you wanna write a sonnet, stretch your writing muscles by writing some haikus. If you wanna write political essays, you know, instead write kids fiction or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I wanna write theological books. I'm gonna stretch my muscles and write kids books. Now that said, I actually fell in love with writing kids books, and given the age of my kids right now, I would like to keep going, but I think I wanna close out this series. I think I'm gonna write a couple things, hopefully that we can use for Ezra that maybe are a bit more pastoral and theological. But I would like to come back. I just don't have anything mapped out after this particular story arc.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, listeners, go buy the book. We will post the link, the Amazon link, in the show notes, so you can go there. You can support our one and only NP Wright, and yeah, that'd be great. I mean, Nate, I think you did a great job. Just want to encourage you with that. It has
Thank you.
encouraged me to do the same. So I'm saying all this for you to hold me accountable to writing, because I want to do the same. I've been enjoying it, and I think it's really cool. Just seeing my kids be as excited as they are with your stuff. I would love for them to be excited about me doing something similar. And again, these books may never leave my computer, and I might just read them to my kids, and that's actually totally fine
And that
as
would be
well,
fine too, but I
right? And
think I
that's
think I think you'll find what I found is that you'll fall in love with the process and
yeah,
doing it. You'll see it bear fruit in terms of the conversations you're having with your kids. You'll see your kids get elated with it. You'll see other kids get excited when you share it with them, and that'll just be motivation to keep going.
yeah, that's right. All right. Well, anything else, Nate, or are we good to wrap up?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well,
Thanks for
listeners,
asking.
thank you for joining us. And again, go buy Nate's book. He would be really blessed by that. Go spread the word, and just thank you always for your ears. Thank you for being a supporter of what we're doing here. Be sure to just check us out on Patreon. Also, make sure to subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast service you use. But until next time, stay nerdy.